well, welcome to our Divorce 101 webinar. My name is Heather O'Connor from O'Connor Family Law. So this is the first time we're doing this, and assuming it goes well, we'll be doing it again. We did have a few technical difficulties getting started, but here we are. Oh, Jennifer is here. Do I admit her now?
I would wait until you're done.
Yeah, but now I can't see. I'm going to have to start over too.
No,
Should I just admit?
Still go. Well, you can admit her now if you want.
Yeah.
And just have her wait.
Okay, she can wait. So picking up where I left off, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go through an overview of the divorce process and a couple tips that are good to know if you're headed in that direction. Then Jennifer Giuliano, who is an amazing real estate agent with Keller Williams, she's going to come in and she's going to talk about things that you want to keep in mind when you're going to be selling your home through a divorce process. Then we're going to have Adam Wakovich, who is a certified divorce financial analyst, and he owns, I forget the name of his company, Divorce Financial Analyst, I think is actually the name of his company. He's amazing. He's the person that we turn to with a lot of questions about quadros, retirement accounts, and he's going to give some tips on things that you can think about financially to make sure that you're all set and moving forward and setting yourself up for a good financial future. Then we have Stacy Beal, who is our firm's high conflict relationship coach. She's going to be giving some tips on things that you can do personally to put yourself in a better position moving forward. So one, you can get a better legal result, and two, you can actually have a future that you're really happy with and you don't end up in the same position you were when you called a law firm or had to file for a divorce in the first place. Then we're going to be talking to Chantal Mancuso, who is our intake coordinator here. And she's going to be giving some tips on things to look for when you are interviewing an attorney so that you make sure that you get a right fit. Then at the end, I know a lot of you have already sent in some questions, so we're going to be dealing with those and trying to get through as many as we can. Now I know we are starting a little later than we planned, so we'll try to keep it moving. If we have to go a little longer, maybe we'll do that too. So to get started, I just want to give a real quick background as to who I am and why we're doing what we're doing. And I didn't become an attorney until after I went through my own divorce. And at that point, I had 3 kids under the age of 6. So when I went through my divorce, divorce isn't fun. Nobody believes divorce is a good time. And it's not. It's draining, it's hard, it can be scary at different points. And what happened through that is I saw a lot of injustice in the system. I saw a lot of things that I thought needed to be different, both in the courthouse and the way that the procedure went, as well as with the process in and of itself. Oh, okay, hold on. I have to admit people first. I just got a note. So we've got Jennifer and Adam, I think, coming in. So hello.
Hi.
Hi. I was still just going through a little bit of the background. Is Adam in now too? Because I saw he is. No, it says only Jen. I know I saw something about Adam trying to come in. We'll get this down perfect next time we do it. Maybe he hung up. All right, so moving right along. And I saw just a lot of injustice with what was going on. And I thought, I can try to make this process different and better. So I went back to school. I had only had a high school diploma. I went back community college, undergrad, law school, eventually started my firm in 2016, and we've grown terrifically, since then. And what I want to do is educate people in a way that it makes the process less scary, less standoffish, and more understandable so that people don't have that same anxiety as they're going through. and can have a better idea of what that process is. So because we're focusing on divorce, I just want to give a very quick, and Jen, I know you're already in here, but I'm just going to give a quick overview before we jump to you, okay? Just
Sure,
because we did get started a little late, we had some technical difficulties on our end.
that's fine.
So basically, if you think of divorce like a highway, and so before you even leave your house, you have to map out your plan. And when you're talking about divorce, you have to think of that as, are you taking the uncontested route or are you taking the contested route? And the difference with that is really what you've done prior to filing in court. So with an uncontested divorce, everything has to be agreed upon. I'm good. You're throwing off my
Sorry.
too quiet.
No, I just wanted to make sure.
What are you going to do? So, with an uncontested divorce, you are working out every single aspect of your separation agreement before you even file. That means the two of you have to agree on custody if you have children, on a parenting plan if you have children, if you have a home, what you're doing with it, how you're splitting it, retirement accounts, financial accounts, absolutely everything. You have to come to an agreement on every single issue, as well as sign all the paperwork. Then it gets filed. Once it's all filed, then the court will have you come in and give you your divorce. Now, I should say as well, because I do believe there are people on here that aren't just in Massachusetts. Our firm is in Massachusetts. We're licensed to practice in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So the process that I'm speaking about is specifically for Massachusetts. If you're in a different state, it might be a little bit different, but you still might be able to get some information from here that's helpful. So the pros that I see with an uncontested divorce is basically they're more amicable. They lead to friendlier outcomes. The problems I've seen with uncontested divorces is, and the best example I have is that we had a case. It was a very short-term marriage. There was no property, no children, no nothing. It should have been basically create the paperwork, sign it, and you're on your way. But the other person did not want to let go of marriage. So they said they would agree, they said they agreed with everything, but they would not sign the documents necessary in order for us to file the uncontested divorce. So even though it was a very short-term marriage, we tried for almost a year and a half to get this agreement. Finally, our client said, you know what, go ahead and file. And so we had to do that, and then we were able to move forward with the process. So that's the downside of that, is if the other side doesn't agree to even one tiny little thing, you can't move forward with an uncontested divorce. So a contested divorce is kind of like what you think of when you see the things on TV. Somebody gets, files in court and the other person gets served and they're like, oh my God, I'm getting a divorce. So that's what a contested divorce is. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your case has to be conflicted and it has to be contentious. It just means one person has decided, hey, I don't want to be here anymore, and we're going to move forward so that we can each move on with our lives. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and I'm a big proponent of, from day one, always think of ways that you can settle. Some cases are going to have to go to trial, but the majority of them are going to settle, and the sooner you can do that, usually the better for everyone. So if you're thinking of divorce like a highway, you get on, and again, we're going to talk about contested. So you get on this highway, and there's lots of rest areas along the way that you can pull off on. But that last exit is the one when you have either your separation agreement or you're going all the way down the highway to that very last exit, and that's your trial. So some of the stops that you'll see along the way are, what we have here is mandatory discovery or mandatory disclosure. It's things that you have to give the other side as soon as there's a divorce pending. And those are things like bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, health insurance paperwork, and a few other things. So it's best if you start getting that prepared, because that happens pretty quickly. Another rest stop that you may need, especially if you have kids or there's any financial issues that you can't agree upon, we've had situations where somebody finds out they're getting a divorce and then they say, hey, I'm not paying the mortgage anymore, and you have to get into court. So if there's anything where you need temporary orders during the pendency of the litigation, you might have to go in for a hearing. And I'm not going to get into what that is because we're just trying to give a quick little overview. But then you get your order, and that is what the law is for your case until you have a final judgment. Now, if somebody's not doing it, so say there's a child support order and the person who's supposed to be paying stops paying, what happens then is you can file a contempt. So a contempt is another little roadblock or another little pullover that might come up during your process. And that's basically saying they're not doing what they're supposed to, and we need the court to step in and make them do it. The next big event that usually takes place is what's called a pretrial conference. And there's some requirements for that where you have to have a settlement meeting, you have to exchange financial statements, and you have to go to this hearing and prepare a memorandum. Now, the pretrial hearing is incredibly important because it allows you to give your side of the story, which a lot of people are waiting for. From day one, they just want their side of the story to be heard. And the pretrial conference is the time to do that. So your attorney, or you if you're representing yourself, you're going to go in and you're going to lay out the contested issues. So if there are things that you have agreed upon, you can potentially enter that as a partial judgment. If there's not, then this is where you get judicial feedback. So you go in, you tell the judge your position, and a lot of times the judge will say, okay, well, if everything were to come before me at trial, as is being said, so they're not saying, you're right or you're right. They're just saying if everything was true that I just heard, then this is likely how I would decide. And what can happen at that point is you might be really set on a position, but then you get feedback from the court that you know whether your position is valid or not. And then you're going to make a cost-benefit analysis of whether you're going to move forward and move that on towards trial or whether you're going to settle. And everything within your divorce is a cost-benefit analysis. You have to look at the expenses that you're paying out. And that expense, lawyers are expensive. That expense is not just financially. That expense has to do with the emotional toll that comes along with the divorce process. It has to do with taking time off of work because you have to go to hearings, you have to go to depositions, you have to meet with your attorney. There's a lot of things that are going to interrupt your daily life while you're going through a divorce, and that is part of the cost and the expense that you have to take into consideration. So then the majority of cases are going to settle by or shortly after that pretrial conference. Now, if the case has to keep going, this is usually when you get into heavier discovery. Sometimes that can happen before the pretrial, but usually leading up to the pretrial is more, are we able to settle the case? Some judges also make you finish discovery, but that's a conversation for another webinar. So if your case can't settle, and again, cost-benefit analysis, if it's a financial issue, it's much easier. It's very difficult if the contested issues that are remaining are those about your kids, because you can't put a price tag on your children. I can't say, well, I'll spend up to $5,000 to fight for my child, and because then it comes down to the other parent says, well, I'll fight for $10,000 for our children. It's very, very difficult to do that, and I understand that, but it still has to be taken into consideration, because I had a case where it's a 2.5-year marriage. Their divorce went on for 5 years. They each spent over $100,000 in fees. That amount would have put their child through 4 years of college. And instead, they walked away with something neither one of them were crazy about. But those are the things you have to just take into consideration. So I know people had more specific questions. That's just a general overview of the process and what you can expect. But I want to get into the fun stuff where it's not just me talking, and we are talking to some of the amazing people that we have coming on today. And Jennifer, who's sitting here, she is one of them. So let me just double check. Caitlin, can everybody see Jen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So Jen, you work with Keller Williams. I've seen her get award after award for her work, and I know she's constantly, involved in new training to make sure that she's staying on top of everything. And I love her quote that is, "I'll make it happen, you call it home." And so within a divorce, there's always two options. You're going to keep the home or you're going to sell it. So, what are some of the complexities that arise when selling a home when a couple's going through a divorce, specifically as a real estate agent?
First of all, thanks, Heather, for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay. Okay. Selling a house on a good day can be really stressful for the best of reasons. So when you're adding in the factor of a divorce, whether it's a so-called friendly divorce or not, there can definitely be a lot of, I would definitely say use the word complexities. People who are what I would call the in-spouse, who's somebody who's living in the house, maybe someone's already moved out, depending on who wants to move or who wants a divorce, I've seen people make it very difficult for getting the house ready, or even just declining showings, being unrealistic about when the house can be shown or how it's going to be shown. So those are the first two that come to mind. And it's kind of, and I will probably say this a couple of times. It's you're already making a problematic situation more problematic for yourself. So unfortunately, I've seen sellers, and I can sympathize with them. On the fact they're going through something. But we have one job. I have my job is to sell the house for you. And years later, I've seen people who have become actually really very friendly again. So it's in that moment. It's the momentary stress of already moving, getting divorced. Maybe they didn't want to they didn't want to get divorced, or they do, doesn't matter. It's still, as you know, very stressful. So the biggest things I've seen really are just, not making the house accessible, not putting it in as show ready as possible, making excuses after excuses as to why it can't be shown or why it can't be done, really just to prolong the inevitable, especially if it's a court ordered sale. It's like this is nothing to do with me, and it's not a fault of either person, but really just kind of stepping back and looking at the big picture of it. It's a temporary pain and it will go away, but just don't make it worse on yourself by limiting showings, limiting making the excuses, which I understand where they're coming from. My understanding of it, and also the reality of, okay, the house is on the market now, this is happening. It can be very emotional. But we're here. I'm Switzerland. I am 100% Switzerland. I'm not here to take sides. I will listen, but I that's your job,
Yeah.
not mine. So those are the first couple that I would say.
So, when somebody's trying to pick a realtor,
Mhm.
how do they know, one, if this is somebody who is familiar with divorce, or are most realtors? And is there anything on the real estate side that realtors can do to help understand the issues of a couple who's going through a divorce and has to sell their home? Is there anything they can do to understand those issues and learn how to deal with them better?
From the agent or the seller interviewing the agent.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, it has to be a good fit, and somebody who. And I've seen agents. We've had conversations even amongst agents. That they've actually flat out told me, "Oh, I play one not play one side against the other, but they'll sympathize too much." And it's again, we really have to put that body armor on, because we may have a unknown bias. Maybe we have been in a similar situation as one of those sellers, so we have more empathy for them. But also, it's not just about if somebody's new doesn't mean that they're not going to be the right fit. Just because someone's the top agent in all of the world doesn't mean they're going to be the best fit either. So I really think it comes down to a comfort level of, how well that person listens, rather than someone who comes through and says, "Oh, I've sold every house in this neighborhood and I do X, Y, Z." That's about them. That's about the agent. And I have to tell you, like, sometimes we don't like working with those agents either, but they do get a lot of business. So it's really just kind of a gut feeling of, this person's going to listen to me. They might tell me things I don't want to hear, but that's going to be the fact of whether or not they were getting divorced or if they were just moving in for the first time. So I really think experience does come down to play, and also how well that person listens, not just for what they're saying, but what they're not, and also being observant to things that may or may not come up, that would affect the sale. So that it's really a holistic approach. It's really seeing the big picture,
Okay.
um, not so much about whose sales are better or whatever. This is a really emotional situation, so having that good fit is really important.
And so, what would you say? Because this actually happens quite a bit, where as an attorney, our clients are going through a divorce, they have to sell their house, and then it comes down to they have to pick an agent. And
Mhm.
sometimes they agree and it's nice and easy, and other times they just can't agree. So we start, suggesting people who we have found to be fair, to be, right on top of communication, on top of selling things. But the second an attorney makes a proposal for, I think we should use this real estate agent, especially where our firm does a lot of very high conflict things, the other side immediately thinks, well, if they're suggesting them, they must have some in. They must be getting a kickback. The other side must be getting a better deal. What what could you say to people to help them understand that that's not the case?
I mean, I'm all about transparency. So, and I can see where especially if they're not in the best frame of mind, understandably, I can see where a seller would think that. For example, if you referred me somebody because they couldn't come to it, maybe the husband will think, oh, well, she's tight with Heather, so she's going to side with the wife. But I do reassure them that's not my job. Like I do, and you know as well too, that I'm able to not switch gears, but switch mindset. I've had friends who were selling houses and buying houses. And I've even told them myself, I'm talking to you as my friend now. Now I'm talking to you as my agent, as your agent. And so even just having from their feedback, my saying to that to them, like, I'm not here to take sides of your situation. I'm simply here to get the best terms, the best price, the best overall situation for the house. It's nothing to do with who I know, who I don't know, who I feel sorry for or who I don't. It's just I'm pretty laser focused on that's the house I need to get it sold.
So
And
what is the current housing market like? Because I know when we went through the pandemic, everything went insane, and then there was a lot of questions, especially when we were trying to settle divorce of were they paying too much, were they not paying enough, and that's always an issue. Where's the housing market now, and where do you kind of see it going for people who are looking to put their house on? Is now the time to do it, or should they maybe wait a little while?
it depends. It's really specific to what their needs are. If it's a court ordered situation, okay, the house has to go up for sale when the kids are 18. If the kids are 18, the house has to go up for sale, whether it's, the dead of winter, unless it was, and I've learned in, when that divorce training course that I'm taking, which has been incredibly helpful. Even they've learned things just in that over the last 12 weeks where I didn't even think of it before. So we'll ask, is there a reason why they have to sell it now? Can they stay? So I kind of want to communicate everything. I need everything as much as I'm allowed to have on the table because that will help me gauge that. So is the market better or worse than it was? It's the media, as you probably know, is my biggest nemesis because they slant things so badly. You'll read these things where it says, sales are down. Well, they are because there's not much on the market. It's not that nobody's buying. It's just that if there's not much to sell, it, there's only so many people that can live in the house. So it's steadier than it was. I think it's more of a normal market than it has been in a lot of years. It's not dead. It's still moving as long as things are priced correctly. The rates, I'm actually glad to a degree, went up because that's what you saw when they were 2, 3, 4%. People were waiting for an hour, a half hour outside a door for an open house just to get in. And there was a very little chance they were getting that house without giving away their firstborn.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's, a little bit, I have to reset everyone's expectations, whether they're going through divorce or not. Some things do still go quickly. Some things will sit a couple weeks. With the rates, again, I think it's a healthier market than it has been. Although that was great, to some degree, where things were selling and people were getting obscene amounts of money for things that I don't know why or how in some cases. But this is much more steady. I don't want to say normal, but just really steady. Not the frenzy that it was, and it's certainly not. It's not stalled at all.
So if people are looking at putting their house on the market, and
Mhm.
whether they're going through a divorce or not, because I think this is really a generalized
Mhm.
question for most people, what are some of the little tips or the little things that you've seen people be able to do that can get the greatest return? What would you recommend anyone to do when putting their house on the market to make sure that they get the best sale price possible?
It depends, and I'll ask everybody. What are you able to and willing to put into it? Maybe if it's some painting. Painting is like liquid magic because that today is something that people look at, and I know that especially with certain sets of buyers, generations of buyers. For example, I know of a listing where they painted it from top to bottom because it needed it, and the flooring is not as ideal as what some buyers want. And you would think that, oh my God, it needs new flooring if and they're not buying it because of that. So we were kind of like mitigating the losses because the colors were so specific. They were very bold. They were very personal. They were very, in some cases, just not upkept. So, with these people, I recommended, definitely top to bottom painting. And these weren't going through a divorce, but more of a general question. Changing out light fixtures, making sure that the entryway looks good, that it's not full of pets, because people who are allergic to a dog, for example, will immediately know if someone has a pet in there and they can't see it at all. So just even if they're not able to go, not saying somebody has to rebuild their house just because they might have, an older kitchen. Some buyers actually want that because they don't want to pay top dollar for something with a remodeled kitchen that they wouldn't have picked out themselves. In a lot of cases, buyers will say, okay, fine, let me give like a baseline and I'll go and do it myself. So I don't want sellers to feel like they have to go and completely rebuild it. They're already going through enough. But if the very, 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 very least money is really short, if nothing else, make sure that the lighting is good in there, and also how your deep cleaner come through. Now, I'm not talking like a weekly, just running off the counters, but a good deep clean, so that at least it shines in the pictures. Decluttering. People are going to be packing anyway, so it's kind of, you don't want to sell a vacant home. It's not doesn't show great either, but you definitely don't want everything in all one room. We're forgiving about garages and basements to a degree, but that's where I work with the stager too. It's kind of third party. I know what a house needs more often than not, but I'll also bring in a stager and say, okay, here are some even more objective. She's one level more objective than I am of things to do. And a lot of them won't really cost money. But if they have some money to put into painting, if they have some money to put into, $100 lighting fixture over the bathroom, if for some reason, a little pet peeve of mine, when I see lights that the bulbs don't match, or those squirrely ones, and you next to an LED, it shows badly in the photos, and it just, to a buyer, even though it seems like a very small ticket item, they're looking for reasons to deduct. Mm-hmm. So those are some small items, and just making sure that the entryway is neat, clean and presentable as possible. So, they don't have to go and rebuild it.
Now, have you ever had a situation where, because I know a lot of the people either call and make individual showings or you do open homes. Have you ever had a situation where the person who's living in the home, let's say they've already separated, the person living in is not cooperative with all of that? And what have you done, and understandably, if it's going through the court process, the court sometimes has to be involved. But is there anything the agent can do to help mitigate that situation where you might have the person on the outside saying, no, you need to get in and do it anyway, and the person on the inside saying, or maybe they're not saying anything because they're
Right.
just not responding to you.
Right.
How do you handle those types of situations?
I try to find out why, because I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. But if for example, I do remember one in particular, and it was a divorce case where the woman had lived in the house. They'd been divorced years before. That's what I was thinking of, the court order when the kids actually, it was out of college, but whatever it was now time, according to the order, for her to get the house sold. And she was stalling every which way to Sunday, because she raised her family there, etc. So I really did have to have a sit down with her and say, look, I understand it's frustrating. People coming in and out of your house, asking her, like, what was the hesitation? And what it turned out to be was something as simple, but as simple as that she didn't know where to go. Mm-hmm. So she was afraid that if her home sold too quickly and she didn't have a place to go, that she was going to be homeless. And so in that case, I had recommended her, talk to her. This years ago, so I'm going to say I wasn't as experienced, but I picked out that that's what the hesitation was. So I talked to her. I said, look, just whether she ended up with family, was able to get a small condo, but she was so frozen that she just didn't want to do anything. She had that almost like that analysis paralysis. So I think asking the right questions and kind of reading the room was helping. And once she did talk to her lender, she talked to her attorney and realized that she could in fact get a new home, in the terms of whatever they needed to do financially with their agreement. She was fine after that. But she was shutting down. She wasn't talking. She wasn't letting showing. She was making them difficult. And on the surface, it's like, okay, we need people coming in at 3:00, and what am I telling them? Because I'm not going to tell somebody that, sorry, my seller is being difficult. They're going through a divorce and she's not answering. I can't say that. So I really did have to just have a conversation with her, and kind of the conversation led the questions into what it was that the issue was. And I'm sure everyone's going to be different, that, but kind of more listening. And like I said in the beginning, listening, observing, asking the right questions, and then kind of taking it from there to find out what to do next. But yeah, that one definitely stood out.
And so within the legal practice, if I represent one party, I'm conflicted out of representing the other party. Is it similar in the real estate world? Like if you are representing sellers of the home and they're going through a divorce, if one of them comes to you and says, "Look, I need another place to live," are you able to work with them to find some other place, or does that create some sort of seen bias and you don't do that?
Both, because as long as both parties are okay with it, because if they have to move, and this is where I come back with transparency. If they are saying to both of them saying to me, "We both want you to find us something afterwards," I'll have them put it in writing and say, "Okay, this is," because I don't want someone coming back later saying, "Oh, you're helping him, but you're not helping me," or vice versa. You must be siding with him, because again, it's totally the optics of it. So I would suggest to them, like, okay, here, if you want me to help you, I'm going to help either both of you, and I want both of them to know that I'm helping one or the other, so it doesn't look bad. Or the easiest way in that case, if say one has to move out versus before the other one, maybe somewhere already has to go. But while I'm in the listing period, if I feel that the dynamics of it would not be working in my or their best favor to work with them, I would just probably refer them to another agent and say, they can help you, because they're going to be completely removed from it. So that way I can just focus on the sale of it. And if I have to give up a sale for it, because it would just make it better for them and make them feel that I'm not taking sides, it's fine with me. And the code of ethics with that program that I was talking to you about too is I can't sell. I could never buy their house, and even if it's something that I wanted to buy, and I cannot double side it. So, for example, buyer Joe comes along and says, "Oh, I love your house at 29 Valley Road in Dover. I want to buy it. Can I come to you directly?" I can't do that. So it's strictly about the sale and nothing else, unless both parties are totally okay with me helping them. And I want that in writing.
Yeah, everything in writing.
Right. And after the sale is closed, it's fair game. And again, at that point, it's a very different situation. But during the listing period, I would feel more comfortable either having them both okay with it or just referring it out to someone who I know could take care of it.
Really awesome. So if someone does want to get in touch with you to either sell their house or to help buy another house, how would they get in touch with you?
Best way is phone. My mobile, I'm sadly always on it. 508-294-0778. Or if they go through my website, which is jennifersoldmyhouse.com, they can find me there too. I'm all over social media like you. So, Instagram, Facebook, website, but easiest way really is my phone. Again, 508-294-0778.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. She is absolutely amazing. She is one of my go-tos, a wealth of knowledge and an expert in her field. So, Jen, thank you so much for coming
Thank
on
you.
and sharing with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And so now we're going to turn the tables and talk to Adam Wiekovich, who is a certified divorce financialist with Divorce Financial Solutions. I apologize because I had a mind blank when I was announcing your company earlier, and I just couldn't remember the name of it. But we got it now.
Yeah.
So just like Jen, Adam is, I think, one of the best in his field, at least one of the best that I've run into. And whenever we need help with, retirement divisions or quadros or, complex financial issues, we usually do turn to him. So he's a favorite of ours. There's no kickback or anything. This isn't one of those situations. But, I wanted him to come on today and talk about some of the things that people can think about financially as they're heading into a divorce. So we just talked with Jen about the sale of the house and things that people can think about there. Financially, what are
Mhm.
some of the things people should start thinking of even before they file and definitely after they file to make sure they're protected moving forward?
It's a good question. So I think it starts with good inventory, and that's always easier, or usually easier for one person. If you look at a household, they divide up those sort of bill paying and investment management and things. Typically one person has it. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging for maybe one of the spouses, but get good accounting of what you have. And I think that one of the things we try to help people do is look beyond the divorce. It's not easy, so when someone goes through the process, all hands on deck are for, asset, income, and debt division, which has to be done in the eyes of the court to be separated. But it's better if we can take a little time in that process and look at sort of what the outcome would be. And so we help them look at the transitional years, the next 3 to 5 years, and then later on, into retirement. So, again, good accounting, start to be thoughtful about sort of what pieces of the marital estate they'll have, and if those are the right pieces for them based on what they want to do.
Sorry, I think maybe my volume is not high enough because she's plugging in my microphone as we speak.
All right. I can hear you fine. Hopefully you can hear me.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I can, yeah.
a lot of people think of, using a certified divorce financialist or somebody that might have millions of dollars of assets or, a very complex issue. In what ways can a couple use you? Maybe they have a house, maybe, it's more modest equity and assets. How can they utilize you and what can you do for them?
Sure. So we would help them in the same manner. So whether we're dealing with, a number of properties and assets and, investment assets, income properties, pensions, or even if it's a simplified case, one house, 2 incomes, some kids, it's just going to shorten the process, which is going to mean it's going to be less expensive to them, less hours. But the goal and the benefit is the same. Anyone can benefit from a thoughtful sort of, you're basically tearing apart a plan that might have been built for 2, and you need to sort of make sure that it can be reassembled appropriately for, each of them going forward. So what we try to do is help them avoid mistakes, and everybody can benefit from that service. So I think it's a good point. They shouldn't feel like they shouldn't work with someone like us or consult with us just because in their view they don't have sufficient assets. And we've worked with people at all levels, certainly multi-million-dollar marriages, net worth, down to sort of maybe zero net worth, a lot of debt or something like that. But you can still benefit from talking through the process with someone who's, not engaged emotionally like us, who can sort of weed through some of that tension and focus on some of the natural things we know from our work, right? Just pitfalls that you might not be aware of that might come up later because you took a certain asset or you didn't take advantage of a certain benefit. So there's a lot of things that I think could help any family of any asset level.
Okay. And one of the things I've heard in a number of cases where, the couple comes in and one has your typical 401k or some sort of IRA and the other has a pension. And they come in and they say, I have 401k, they have a pension, just walk away with what you have. What's the downside to that, and what's something that, especially in that situation, people might want to think about?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of times people do that because they don't want to bother getting into the analysis of it, and they think it's, they just imagine that it's fair. The trouble with that is a 401k balance is going to be known. You can look at a statement and the value is what it says, but a pension is really a more obscure asset. Think about Social Security. So what is that worth to you today? The money that you've put into the system that won't be paid out for another 15 or 20 years. How do you line that up with a 401k to determine if it's fair? And that's something we do through a pension valuation, where really we're taking that income stream, giving it an accurate, court-approved value today that can let a couple know that, okay, my pension is worth $500,000 and this 401k is $500,000. Now they know without a doubt that, okay, we can do that. But there's another second step that's more important. Even if the values are the same, for example, this is where you want to think about retirement planning. So it might not be unfair for each person to take their own, and let's use the example with a 401k for one spouse and a pension for the other. But the spouse with the pension has a guaranteed income that's going to give them a different security level, a different retirement sort of income stream, if you will. And the person with the 401k, they will assume different risks because that is not a pension. And so it still might be again, thoughtful for them to think about taking half of each. In other words, now they both still have the same amount of marital assets at the time of separation, but they both have two different income streams at retirement. So that's very different. Both options would be approved by the court. It's certainly going to be fair, but now the secondary question is, all right, besides being fair today, would I be better off financially longer term if I were to get a little bit of a pension and a little 401k? And that's something that we can help them with. It's a little bit, personal as well, based on other aspects of their lifestyle, what their capacity to earn and save and things like that. But so certainly be aware of the values. Don't just give it away because you don't want to really take the time to learn about it.
And whenever I try to educate like what we're doing here on our webinar, I always think about, if somebody doesn't have a lawyer and they're representing themselves pro se. So having a lawyer, obviously, they're going to be led to understanding some of the things they need to think about. But if somebody's going along and they're trying to divide their assets and they don't have a lawyer, there's tax consequences that come along with that. And what are some of the things people should be thinking of about how the tax consequences can affect what they're doing within that division?
Yeah, exactly. Something that comes up. We'll give a super simplistic example. You might have, let's say someone has a brokerage account or like cash in a bank, $200,000, and then someone else has an IRA worth $200,000. If we line that up on an Excel spreadsheet and apportioned half of, someone took the cash and someone took the IRA, they both have 200,000. That's going to be looked upon as a fair asset division. The person with the IRA doesn't really have 200,000. So when they take it out, they're going to owe taxes and they're going to get less. So even if we use something simple like a 20% tax rate, that 200 isn't really worth the same. And as long as they know that going into the agreement, it doesn't mean they still couldn't land on that. But that's something that's really important. Again, if someone's under retirement age, they also have to know that the person who takes that IRA, they can't use it really. It's not accessible without penalty. So these are some, that's a pretty basic, but it's easy to overlook. You're just looking at balances on a worksheet, and if they're worth the same on paper, then you think they might be netting out the same, and they're not. And the other example might be a brokerage account with a bunch of different securities that have unrealized taxable gains. Same thing, right? They just have to be aware that if the person who receives those sells those assets later, there's going to be some taxes associated with. And as long as they're thinking about that prior to, accepting that asset and they understand the tax ramifications, I think that's fine. But I mean, some of those can be really pronounced. They could have a lot of tax liability, and the savvy spouse could basically give those assets away, knowing, and not to say that people are, always underhanded, but it's an easy way to it's an easy way to give somebody something that looks really good and turns out to be not as good, right? So that happens, and so the pro se person just wants to either do good research on their own or just engage somebody who might be able to help them with those sort of items.
Okay. And then I think the last thing I kind of want to touch base on, just because I know we're running short on time,
Sure.
is that you are a quadro specialist. And so can you just talk about a little bit about what that is, when they come into play, and why they're necessary?
Sure. So there are basically laws around retirement accounts that protect the owner of the account. So the most common is ERISA law. And the good news is, it protects everybody, our retirement accounts, from creditors and bankruptcy. And so basically it's an ironclad shell that says no one can touch this money. It's for that person. But introduce divorce, there had to be a mechanism created that allowed that to be, circumvented. So what a quadro does quite literally is it's a legal document that sort of, it's an exception to those rules where it allows an asset to be divided while the owner is still alive. Because otherwise, a retirement account can't pass to anybody else until they die. But divorce is an exception. So really, just by sort of functional definition, that's what a quadro does. So anytime a retirement account, like a pension, and that could be any kind of pension, a military pension, a federal pension, state, or 401k account, you're going to require a secondary document. And so you would agree to how that would be divided with your lawyer, and that would go into the agreement. But they need to know that to get that accomplished as a secondary document. And so we get a lot of engagement on that. And so we're really working with people post separation to sort of iron out those final transfers, right? So before those transfers can happen, we prepare those documents, and it's a super specialized field. It's got its own minefields and nuances, but that's where we specialize and help people in that.
Okay, great. And I think the final question before I ask you how people can get in touch with you is, if somebody said, give me one tip on, I'm getting ready to go through a divorce, what is the most important thing for me to do to set myself up well? Give me one.
Yeah, one tip,
pressure's on.
even though it's not one step, I think you really want to think about making sure that you optimize what you are looking for in the agreement. And I know it's not an easy one step, and I say that in this context. There are many ways to slice a marital pie where it's fair and equitable because of value, but you do not want to take an asset like a house or a pension that you emotionally attach more value than is really worth, and find out later on that you should not have done it. You can't afford it. It was a mistake. It's not working out. And that's the service we provide. We will help you test any sort of division to make sure that it looks like it's going to work later on, because asset division you can't come back 2 years and say, I want to change your mind. You don't want to divide assets like this. So I think you want to look at divorce as a financial planning exercise, and I think that's the tip.
Okay. Yeah, and I know I said that was the last one, but I know we've talked about it in other webinars that we've done, and I just want to again emphasize, where you said people become very emotionally attached to things like a home, or I've heard people talk about my pension. This is mine. I've worked for it. Where really the most important, and I shouldn't say the most important because there's a lot of important things, but when you get tied up in the emotions, like you just said, it makes the entire process so much more complicated, and oftentimes ends up with somebody, the person who's very emotionally attached, with a worse result. So I think it was great that you brought that up, and I just wanted to reiterate it because I do think it's so important. So if somebody wants to work with you, or have you draft their quadro, look through everything, look at pensions, retirements, how do they get in touch with you?
So you can get us by our website is divorcefinancialsolutions.net. We're in Worcester, right in Kelly Square. Always accessible by email. We have a free calendar. You can a calendar where you can just book 30 minutes with us to talk about anything you want. You can do that online and just hit an opportunity that's open for you. You can always call the office. We try to be accessible whenever we can, and that's 508-839-3730. And or through your favorite attorney. We always want to work with you and help you and your clients. So any of those methods work.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, for me, one of the biggest things with working with somebody is that communication. And it's one of the reasons, we connected and we've continued working with you, is because you are so quick at getting back, whenever anybody needs anything, especially where we're in court at the last second, trying to come up with wording. And I'm like, Adam, I need language. So you've just been fantastic. And I said it the last time we chatted, where, I don't want you to stop working for me, but if you're an attorney even out there, Adam is your guy.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's a pleasure to work with everyone and make the process a bit easier and improve outcomes where we can. So thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. Bye.
Welcome. Bye.
All right, so now we are turning our attention to the one, the only, the Stacy Beal. And, it's funny because we knew so Stacy actually works at our firm, O'Connor Finley Law, and we knew each other long before she came to work here. And so, she's come on board as our high conflict relationship coach because of the fact that I feel very strongly that when going through a divorce, you can come out with a document that has a bunch of words on it that gives you everything you want, but at the end of the day, it might lay a path out for your life, but it does not change your life in and of itself. I honestly feel and believe that when you're going through a divorce process, if you don't start changing the way you look at things, the way you perceive things, the way you react to things, you're going more than likely to end up in a very similar situation to what brought you to calling our office or needing a divorce or anything else at the same time. On top of that, we deal with a lot of high conflict cases. We deal with people who have very narcissistic tendencies, if not being narcissistic. We deal with a lot of abusive people. And when the other side is coming out of that, they need to rebuild boundaries. Or again, that document where they have all their rights and responsibilities mean absolutely nothing. So Stacy has graciously accepted the position to come into our firm and work with people on that side to help get them where they need to be. Because one, it really does help us do our job. And number two, it does set them up better to know how to communicate with somebody who's high conflict and how to start, protecting themselves, their peace, and their security moving forward. So thanks for taking time out of your busy day. I know you work here, so you don't really have a choice. But but why don't you talk a little bit about, some of the things that you do with somebody coming in? And I know every situation is going to be a little bit different, so there's no one size fits all. But overall, if somebody's, and let's focus, on the fact that we deal with a lot of high conflict. So let's look at a high conflict situation. You might have a spouse that, when they talk to you, it's just negative, it's overbearing. How do you work with that person in basically taking their life back?
Yeah, so first, I think it's important to start that you're right, every case is very different. And the first thing that we need to do when speaking is really come up with a roadmap to success so that we can see what better fits your needs. Talk more about dating as a single parent, rebuilding your social support networks, healthy coping mechanisms, learning when you go through the process, how to communicate and how to document. It's really important to make sure that you're documenting events that are or are not taking place. And as you mentioned, I'm here to help make sure that you keep your legal fees down. So it's really more a great benefit to, to yourself. But yeah, so you're right. It's hard to go through a divorce. It's important to seek support, make sure that you stay focused on your goal and not panic. Divorce is like being on a roller coaster. Stay off social media, and we need to do your research before you start the process of filing the divorce so that you can get your life lined up first. That's one of the important parts that a lot of people don't consider.
Yep. So obviously divorce sucks. I'm the first person to say that that's the truth. And I think a lot of people,
Yes.
when they're coming out of either, an emotionally abusive marriage or sometimes even a physically abusive marriage, a controlling or manipulative marriage, and they think, God, I just can't wait to get divorced, to be free, to be able to move on. And then the divorce happens, and what they find is that because they have children, they are still connected with this person who is still on a daily basis beating them down, trying to control them, trying to manipulate them. Oftentimes, especially if it's true narcissism, they don't care, about anything. It's the game,
Right.
it's the control. That's what's important. How do you work with people, one, to prepare them for that, and two, and I guess not you specifically, but what are some of the things that people can do to prepare for that and to really build themselves up from that so that they don't just go crazy and the whole process keeps happening even after the divorce?
Right. So, it's important to build the boundaries before we even start the divorce process. They don't have to be extravagant boundaries in the beginning, but agreeing to communication rules, parenting guidelines, how to deal with family and friends. Admit your part in the divorce and maybe consider opening your own banking account. But this, Heather, is why it's important to be part of the coaching program to make sure that you're in the right headspace to deal with these issues. Misusing custody orders, not being flexible, child sharing, using the legal system to maintain control, invading your privacy. Lots of these are things that you're going to experience, but stay focused on that end result of getting to where you need to be your best you. And that's what in the coaching program we're going to work toward.
Yeah, and I think, one of the reasons that I brought in this is because what I saw was a lot of times, practicing, we'd have clients that would call, and it wasn't that they had legal questions. It was just that they were feeling nervous. They were feeling overwhelmed. They were feeling extremely stressed. A lot of times when all that's happening, because even when that's not happening, if you get hit with a lot of information, sometimes it can be very difficult to maintain that and to, basically work it out all in your brain. So you might get this overwhelming amount of communication, and then the client has to keep calling back, and that's where we find that they keep asking the same questions over and over and over again. And one of the things that, I really like about this is that it helps the client to save money, because when they have questions that aren't legally based, they can turn to you, where, or a therapist. And I think it's one of the things, if somebody's dealing with, either you don't have a lawyer, which, just to throw it in, you don't need to hire us to work with Stacey, but even if you don't have a coach, or you can't afford a therapist, or your insurance doesn't cover it, there's a lot of great free resources that are out there that people can turn to. And I know, I'm throwing this at you, but do you have a list of any resources that people can utilize?
So if somebody needs to, I do have a list. It consists of child therapists, regular therapists for adults, financial planners, real estate agents, people who can really help you in all different avenues that you're going to be facing when you're going through this process. And if it's not you, and it could be your children who are facing it. But again, like you said, it's great to be part of this team, and a lot of people will call me and help to reduce those financial obligations when talking to an attorney. But I just wanted to remind you that attorneys went to school for law and getting you justice that you deserve. And as we know, right, Heather, attorneys aren't always warm and fuzzy when dealing with the emotional piece. So I'm here to help you get that feeling, feel the well-being, help with the psychological, and take that time that the attorneys don't always have to really focus on getting you to be the client that they need to be prepared and to be calm and know what to expect.
So now you also work with people that are still married. So maybe they're thinking about divorce, or they're trying to figure out whether they should still stay married. What are some of the things that you help people work through? So, and I guess I'm asking you to give away some secrets, but what are some of the questions that you have people ask, if they're facing a situation of, do I stay married, or do I move forward with a divorce? Because I'm sure a lot of people do struggle with that. So, is there anything that, if somebody's out there struggling with that they can start thinking of to decide which way to go?
Sure. So if you're thinking about, do you want to stay married, or are you considering divorcing your partner, you must have a feeling that you aren't as happy as you want to be, and that you think that you can be doing better in life. So you really want to ask yourself, am I happy? Do I hide my real self when I'm in this marriage, and how can I fix this? Am I overcompensating with my friends and family by making my partner look like a person that at home they're really not? Are you posting things on social media that really aren't the way that life really looks? Everybody's life looks perfect on social media. And if you're doing that, think, if it scares you, but you're willing to leave your husband or wife, then that's something that you really need to consider. But reminding yourself that marriage is for two people, right? It's a lot of work. But you have to make sure that you have the time in your daily life for both of you, and you have to be willing to make a change for yourself. If you're not willing to put in the effort that you want your spouse to put in, then it's both of you.
Yep. And I love that because, I get people that come in that say, you know, I want to get a divorce because they don't do anything anymore. They don't treat me the way that they used to. They
Right.
come home and they sit on the couch and they don't help and they don't do this and they don't do this and it's their fault, their fault, their fault. And not saying that they're not wrong, but
Right.
a lot of times it takes two. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of people stop looking at what they can do. So I love the fact that those questions are very, they're all about self awareness. What have
Right.
I done to bring me to this situation, and what can I do to change it? Because
Mhm.
you can't make somebody else fix your marriage. You can't
Right.
force your spouse to be there, but you can change how you act. You can change how
Yep.
you act when they come home. Because I
Correct.
remember sitting across from a woman, she was at my desk, and she was saying something very similar. They don't do this. And I look back, and I'll do this like PG version for what I actually did it. But I looked at her and I go, so when was the last time your husband walked in the door and you dropped everything and just made love? And she was like, that's that's not on me. And I was like, that is on you. That is on you. And unless you're doing that, you're giving up too soon. And there's
Yeah.
situations, obviously if they're abusive, that's not something I'm gonna recommend for somebody to stay in. But
Right.
I think for the most part, if you're in a marriage, try to make that work before you finalize that decision to divorce. And I love that you work with people on that as well. You make them not be our clients.
Right. Yeah, I really want them to work with me and to be a client, but it's nice to hear that they're willing to give it another try if it's something, that they can work back toward.
Okay, awesome.
Important. Make time for the two of them as a couple, plan some personal time. It's important to understand that you're not going to agree on everything, but learning to forgive and be ready to move on together.
Yep. So if somebody does want to work with you specifically, even if they want nothing to do with our firm, how would they get in touch with you?
Yes, I'd love for them to give me a call. We can always reach out, 774-808-1808. You can visit the webpage, familylawma.com, to book an appointment. It's easy and quick. It's a free first appointment. And otherwise, you can email Stacey, STACEY, at familylawma.com. I really look forward to talking with everybody. An appointment.
Awesome. And I hear Chantel on here chatting away.
So, at familylawma.com.
Oh, actually, are we trailing? I'm echoing.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't know who it is, but we're going to switch over. So Stacey, thank you so much for coming and sharing.
Thank you. It's great to talk.
I love what you do, and I'm so thankful to have you here.
Thank you. I'm thankful to be here.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So now switching over to Chantel, who is our intake.
Thank you. It's great to know what you do, and I'm so
hold on, I'm still hearing a wicked echo.
I'm thankful to be here. All right, bye-bye. Bye. So now switching over to Chantel, who is our intake.
Oh, I hear.
Do you hear it?
It's all echo.
Where is that coming from? It's gotta be you because you're new, so I'm gonna blame you. Oh wait,
Yeah, blame it all on me. Is it gone?
I think it's gone. I think whatever you did is perfect. All right, so Chantel is the intake coordinator at our firm. She is usually one of the first people that anyone who is calling in speaks to. She basically screens everyone. In our firm specifically, we have, it's kind of, I don't want to say a tough process to get through, but it is, because we don't want every single person who's calling us. And Chantel is the blocker of the people who we don't want, but she also hears from a lot of people where they don't know who they're calling or what they're doing or anything. So I thought it would be great to have her come on and talk to everyone about, how to prepare yourself for divorce with some of the things she sees that people haven't been doing before they call. And what are some of the things you can look for when you're looking at hiring an attorney or potentially, utilizing them in other ways. So based on the number of calls that you do and the intakes and case evaluations that you go through, what would you say is the number one thing that people who call in Or let me rephrase the question. What's your number one tip to somebody before they call a law firm in regard to a divorce?
So I guess hop off Google. There's a lot of misinformation on Google. As you know, we have a lot of people that come in and they have unrealistic expectations based off of what they have read on Google. Not one divorce case is ever going to be the same. The process is going to be different for everybody. So, write down your goals. I want to know during our conversation what your goals are pertaining to the process of divorce. What are you hoping is going to happen? And if you're coming in with unrealistic expectations, we're going to give you what the realistic expectation is going to be. And that's something that I really love about the firm, because there's a lot of firms out there that don't dwindle down those expectations, and they'll tell you you can have everything. You can take everything from your spouse. Give me that big check and we'll make it happen for you. And at the end of the day, it doesn't happen. And then you're kind of left with nothing and just completely beaten down. So know your basic rights, but when you're reaching out, get a consultation just to get your basic rights. Don't go to Google for those answers, because you're going to get so much misinformation.
So obviously, we can have a very similar, let's just call it almost the same case, or let's call it the exact same. You have two parents, two kids, similar income, similar living situation. Everything sounds like they should get the exact same results. But then you have that one little fact that changes everything. And I think that's what you're talking about, of the expectations. Because I know we get the calls all the time of people saying, well, my neighbor's friend got this, and so that's what I think I should get. Or, my cousin from 13 states away says that I should get this. And I think setting realistic expectations is so important. So what do you think is one of, so kind of to preface this, we also get calls from people who are looking for new attorneys because they're not happy with the ones that they have. What are the biggest complaints you hear from people about attorneys, and what can they do to ensure that the attorney that they're hiring doesn't do that?
So one of the biggest complaints with a situation, they've had an attorney on their case, they're not happy with them, it's lack of communication. That is the number one complaint that I hear on a daily basis. Hey, I've had an attorney on the case the last 6 months. I've tried to contact them the last 5 months and I haven't heard anything. I don't know what's going on. Communication is such a big part of retaining an attorney. It's huge, because a lot of people, like you said, come in, they're learning the process of divorce. They don't know what they're doing. They're looking for that guidance, and that's what they're paying for. It's not just the legal representation. They want the mechanical breakdown of the process and procedure. They want to know what is going on, and not in legal terms, but in layman terms, terms that they can actually understand, because not everybody can understand legal verbiage. Mm-hmm. So communication seems to be the biggest breakdown. Now, pertaining to how to navigate avoiding that situation, have a consultation. Ask them, if I call you at 7 at night and I'm having an issue and I need to obtain a restraining order on my spouse, are you going to answer the phone? Test that situation. Send them an email after the consultation. See if they respond back in a prompt manner. These are ways to figure out if they're going to lack that communication that you so desperately are going to need on your case, or they're going to be prompt in their responses to you. It'll give you a good indication of how things will go retaining that attorney.
Okay. So also, one of a frequent question that I know comes up during our process is, how much is this divorce going to cost me? So if I'm getting divorced and I'm calling you, how much should I expect to shell out?
That is a very hard question to answer. And I tell everybody that because, again, not one divorce is going to be the same. A non-contested divorce is going to be less money than a contested divorce. So, but I like to give the Massachusetts average because it does give a good breakdown and a guideline for them to follow, and the average for Massachusetts can be anywhere from $8,500 to $15,000. And that's for a contested divorce. Again, a non-contested divorce is going to be substantially less. It's not a vigorous process. And for non-contested, typically there's some form of postnuptial agreement or prenuptial agreement that shortens down those fees and the process within the court. So, $8,500 to $15,000 is the average I like to give. When we go up over $15,000, that's when we're looking at a highly contested divorce. You're probably going to end up at trial. And, we don't like taking our clients to trial, especially if it's high conflict. They've already been through so much. Going through a trial process alone is costly and it can be traumatizing too. And we're trying to heal our clients. We're not trying to bring them back into that loop.
Well, I'll also say I do love trial. so
I know you do. I know you
agree with that. But I think what it is it's that cost benefit analysis, and we spoke about it with another speaker. There's sometimes where trial is important. And, I get all hyped up when I'm walking to trial. I get the music, I get the Rocky theme going in my head. I'm driving in my car, and I'm like, I'm pumped. I'm doing jumping jacks on the stairs. Yeah, 100%. And I've had a number of cases where, we've done all the work because the work to get to trial is so extensive. There is so much work, unless you're being unethical and maybe you just don't care. There's a lot of work to get there. And we've had a number of cases that settle the morning of trial, which is like what you were saying. Settlement is usually always going to be the best thing, both emotionally, financially, for the client. It's just a matter of how long it takes to get there, and sometimes you can't. But when I'm in that mindset and where I'm like, okay, I'm ready, and then we settle, usually I'm like happy for our client, but I'm like, God damn. Like, I really wanted to go to trial.
Because you put all that hard work in. You prepared for it. You were ready for that fight.
But yeah, I think, if we're looking at what's the better picture for the client, it's almost always going to be settlement. And we've also had people come in. I remember one case that he called and he was like, this is definitely going to be a trial case. Like, we are at wit's end. We don't get along. We don't, I don't want her to have the kid. She doesn't want me to have the kid. And he was talking he was prepared. He's like, what do I need to do? $50,000 retainer? And I was like, well, let's take it one step at a time. We had to file an emergency motion on that. From the time that he hired me to the time that we got in on the emergency motion was less than a week. We got in on that emergency motion. Mom had hired an attorney who was absolutely fantastic. We sat down that day and worked out the entire divorce agreement, and they got divorced that day. And so that just goes to show, you never know what it's going to be. He was in his mind, this is a trial case. And it actually, I think, still holds my record for my fastest divorce ever. so it's just, you never know. And I know we're running short on time, and I want to try to respect that. But, with your takeaway, and we're going to talk about our firm real quick. Obviously, I'm a salesperson at heart. I love what I do. I put it out there. But I think for good salespeople, not like those used sale car people that they'll sell you something that's broken down. But most people who do sales, they need to really love what it is they do. So can you just speak briefly about why you work here and what it is that, makes us a little bit different?
Yeah, we all work as a team, and I think everybody as a team works really well together. And working here at the firm, the values of the firm they speak for themselves. Your story alone speaks volumes. You put in all this hard work. You created a firm based off of a terrible experience you had that you didn't want anybody else to go through. You know, you didn't want anybody else to be left behind, so to speak. So you brought that value into the firm. You have instilled that in all of us. You know, we are a strong firm together, and we're all also very empathetic to people's needs when they come through. We're building a firm that there's resources for them to get their life back together and put their best foot forward when they are all divorced. You know, they're not left behind. They're not left wondering what they need to do. And that to me is just enough for me to work here at the firm, because it shows that you're not just a face or representation or the brains behind the operation. You actually physically care for each person that comes through the firm. And to me, that speaks volumes, and it says everything about everybody that works here, because we all hold the same values and we're all eager to help.
All right, awesome. Well, again, just for time, and I know, you know, people are anxiously awaiting us to answer the questions that they sent in, but thank you so much for coming on. You know, I think some of the information you gave is going to be really great, and people, you know, trying to find that lawyer that fits for them. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And then turning to Caitlin, and the time that I think most people have been waiting for is for us to answer your questions. So we allowed people, or we asked people, I guess, to submit questions ahead of time. And we've compiled those questions, and we're going to go through as many as we can. I know we said we were going to stop at 2:30, but, you know, we're not. We're going to go a little bit longer. So, because I do want to try to get through as many as I can. So I have not actually looked at the questions yet, but Caitlin is going to be asking me and throwing them at me, and I'm going to do my best to respond. So, oh, and just for introduction, so Caitlin is our managing attorney, so she works with all the attorneys on case strategy, making sure everything's moving forward, making sure that the values of the firm are being upheld within every interaction, and we work, you know, together on doing that, partly because the firm has just, you know, thankfully, knock on wood, continued to grow, and we want to make sure that everything is moving forward as it should be. So, okay, let's throw the questions at me. Let's do it.
Okay. So first and foremost, if I currently have, and some of these questions are very specific to situations, and this is one of the first ones.
And if I currently, before you ask, then I'll also just say, you know, if it's specific to a situation, where I said earlier, that doesn't mean it's going to be the same for every single person, or even the final outcome, because when we're answering questions, a lot of times we can only answer based on the information provided. And when we get into looking at the totality of the circumstances, there might be things that influence, you know, the advice or the guidance that we would give otherwise. So please, even though I'm answering a question, do not take this as legal advice, because if something else, you know, were to come in that could persuade my answer to be different, we just don't know about that right now. So the best thing you can do is speak directly to an attorney, as well as the fact that we are licensed in Massachusetts. We're also licensed in Rhode Island, but we're focusing on Massachusetts here. So all these answers are going to be tailored towards Massachusetts law. If you're somewhere else, unfortunately, you know, I don't know the process there, I don't know the procedure there, but maybe even, you know, something that we say can help point you in the right direction, even though you cannot take it and use it. So that being said, go ahead and ask your very specific question.
Well, if I currently have every other weekend custody due to distance and where the kids are enrolled in school, can I be creative for summer months to make custody 60-40?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an easy yeah. You can be as creative as you want, and I'd have to actually look at the time frame and whether or not this person is asking 60-40 over the course of the year, versus 60-40 in the summer rather than just in every other weekend. I don't know which direction they're looking at. One of the things I do want to say is that when I start hearing, you know, people using specific times, like 60-40, I want 50-50, I want this, that usually indicates to me that this might be money motivated. Where, you know, the 50-50, that doesn't necessarily mean it. When I'm hearing 60-40, sometimes, you know, because of the fact that child support is often tied into how much time a parent has, when I hear somebody say, I want 60-40, my first question would be, why? And if it's not because I want to be more involved in my child's life, I want to do this, they better have a really good reason to back up that 60-40 rather than just, well, I want more time, knowing that that's maybe the next step up the child support. If that were the case, we probably wouldn't take them on as a client. But yes, can you get creative? 100%. Does it take the other person also getting creative? Yes. You know, because in order to change something that was already there either needs to be an agreement or you're going to have to go to court and, you know, fight to change that. And whether or not a judge will really depends upon a lot of different things. But if it's summer, it also depends on the distance. You know, are we talking across the country? Are we talking an hour? You know, those are the things that I'd have to know there. But the short answer, the short and sweet answer, if I didn't talk so much, would be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Should I worry about a joint account before filing for divorce?
Was that the whole question?
Yes.
Damn it. All right. Should I worry about a joint account? That's a little bit of a vague question. So, if it's a matter of, and this is kind of what I'm envisioning behind the question, so I'm making up my own facts here, which may or may not be correct. What I'm seeing with, you know, if somebody's concerned about a joint account prior to a divorce, I'm guessing it's a bank account, and I'm guessing it has some money in it. And I'm guessing the concern is that if somebody says I'm getting a divorce, that the other person is either suddenly going to withdraw all the money and run, or, you know, withdraw the money and not leave enough for the bills to continue to be paid. So I think, yes, whenever you're moving towards a divorce, you know, there's always going to be fears and concerns. You don't know exactly how the other person is going to react. And I always say, you really don't know someone's character until you're going through a divorce with them. Because, you know, I've heard people say people are at their worst during a divorce, but I don't necessarily believe that's true. I think that your character comes out, where if your character is one of resilience, of rising above, you still might have a shitty divorce, but you can move past that and you're not playing the games, you're not looking, you know, for the fight. Whereas if you have a bad character, you're just looking for revenge, you're looking for, you know, to win, and that really shouldn't be what it's about. But because you don't know, and sometimes you might, you know, sometimes you know that your partner isn't the best already, and you're very afraid of that. And so I think it is something to be reasonably concerned about. And some of it's going to depend on, you know, the relationship between the two people heading towards the divorce. Is it something that they can talk about and maybe just split the account down the middle, or they open up separate accounts but make sure that there's enough to pay for the bills? Without knowing more of the specific question and the reason behind it, I think that's the best I can do. But my guess is that's where they were coming from.
Okay. Next one. What do I do if my ex says I cannot attend extracurricular activities and is being hostile towards me in front of the kids when I do go? There is nothing in an agreement that says I cannot attend, but she claims that it is parenting time interference.
Okay. So from that question, I'm getting that dad asked, since it's a she, or it could be a same-sex couple, you know, with mom, I guess. But this is a situation where, and again, because there's nothing there, I'm assuming there's no restraining order. I'll just caveat this with, if there's a restraining order, you have to abide by the terms of the restraining order. If there's nothing that says you can't go to a child's extracurricular activities, then you can typically go, and no court is going to say that you can't. Now, there's also situations that we've seen, because we see the worst of everything. We've seen situations where one parent comes to the extracurricular activities during the other parent's time and then basically take over. And at the end of it, what you hear very often is, oh, well, don't you miss me? Don't you want to come back with me? Don't you want to do this? I'm going here. Wouldn't that be fun? And if it's those things that are going on, and I think this is where you have to ask yourself some questions of, am I doing anything that's inappropriate, or am I going, showing support, and then leaving? Or am I doing something that does interfere? And I can't say one way or another from just that question in itself, but those are the things that I'd be asking. If it's a situation where there's nothing, inappropriate, and mom is just saying, no, you can't show up, it's my time, well, screw mom. This is your kid. You have a right to be there, so you should be able to go. Just be careful, because if mom's already doing that, you don't want a false restraining order against you either, though. It's fine line.
How do I prove parental alienation? And is this something judges care about?
So that's one that we could talk about for hours. So
Yep.
I'm going to try to narrow it down slightly, I think. When you're walking into court, what I find is if you use the term parental alienation, judges immediately think you're just looking to cause problems. When you're walking into court, alleging parental interference, or you really want to focus on the behavior and not the title. It would be like if we're getting divorced, Caitlin, and I go into court and I'm like, well, she's certified crazy. Like, that doesn't mean anything. But if I say, she's threatening suicide all the time, she comes at me with knives, she's threatening to kill our children, well, yeah, now you're certified crazy and everybody's going to know about it. So it's really you want to focus on the behavior that you see as well as the negative impact. Now, usually what you're focusing on, and it depends on what level the alienation is taking place. So there are some behaviors that are really kind of minor alienation behaviors, where it might be, and things that people don't always even realize that they're doing that lead towards that interference. But things like, oh, you want that? No, sorry, dad didn't pay me child support on time this week. Or, mom calling the child during dad's time and talking about how much fun they're having or how much they miss them, and, they're so sad that they're at dad's and not with them. Those are little things that might not rise to the level, but need to be nipped in the bud. If we get into a much higher level of parental alienation, where a child, has been, and usually there's something that somewhere happened that is taken and blown out of proportion, and it's created and played back. And I think that the perfect example I have for this, without getting into the facts, is there was a case where when the parents separated, the kids were so young that there's no way they really could have remembered a lot of what happened. On top of this, there was a complete GAL investigation during the divorce where the kids said, yeah, no, we're fine, nothing happened, we're happy with both parents. Then, years later, now all of a sudden one of the children wants nothing to do with his father, is adamant that his father's abusive, is adamant that, his father is taking advantage of his mom, and this has all been created in their head by what our position was that mom was influencing the child, to the point where the child actually ended up filing a criminal complaint against his dad. And it's a really tough situation. Parental alienation cases are never easy. And again, there's so much that we could talk about, and I know Caitlin had said there's a ton of questions, but I think some of it depends on the judge. Some of it, unfortunately, some judges will just look at it and say, you guys need to get along. The kid doesn't want to see you. There's nothing the court can do. This isn't really a court-related issue. And then there's other judges that they do take it incredibly seriously. To the point where I've seen children removed from the parent who is alienating, the children from the other parent. So it's kind of like a crapshoot, and it's one of those things that I think makes our justice system unjust, is that there's so much discrepancy, there's so much discretion given to each individual judge, that unless you know the judge you're walking in front of, and unfortunately, if you're in that lottery and you get that judge, you don't really have a case. And so I think some judges do take it seriously, I think some don't, but I think it really has to do with how you frame it and how you get it in front of the court and how quickly you get it in front of the court. Because sometimes, unfortunately, if you wait too long, there's not much that can be done.
Okay, switching gears a little bit here.
Okay.
Does overtime have to be included in gross income? What if it's not guaranteed overtime?
Okay, great question. So Massachusetts specifically has guidelines that lay out what is considered income, and overtime does fall into that. So technically, yes, overtime is considered income in relation to a child support calculation. Now, we also have the ability to deviate. So that might be something where if you're getting overtime that's not consistent, one, you either want to show an average of what you've received over the past 3 years. Let's say the year we're getting divorced, I earned a $50,000 bonus because there was some huge change in a company. But every other year, I got a $5,000 bonus. If I'm the one paying child support and my spouse is going, yeah, they got a $50,000 bonus this year, and I want the child support based off of that, that obviously would not be fair. So you have to look back at what the average is, and I think I would actually argue that was such an anomaly that shouldn't even be considered. But some of this depends on the judge. However, when you're looking at a deviation, even if you figure out that number and it goes into the calculation, which, let's just say you figure out that it's an average, even with the ups and downs, of $250 a week. And I don't know, I'm just throwing that number out. I don't even know. But let's say that's what it is. You have the ability to say that based on everything, and this is why a very thorough and true and accurate financial statement is so important. If you can make the argument that based on the expenses, based on your need to live, your income, that including the fact that you also have to provide housing for your child, even if you don't have them on a full-time basis, that you need to be able to have money to go pick them up. You need to be able to have money to do things with them. If you're paying basically, so much money in child support that you are being basically not allowed to be a parent to the full ability that you could, you can argue for a downward deviation. And so that might be something that you can do in that case as well. See how it could just be a yes answer and I make it way more complicated?
I think that one though, does involve an explanation, because it's not quite a simple yes or no. And I'm sure the person asking it probably liked hearing that, while it's included.
Yeah. And
there's
there's so many things within family law where you could say yes or no, but there's so many exceptions to everything.
Yep.
So, and that's why I think it's fun, because you're always looking for, how else can we do this? And so,
yeah, it's not a black and white for almost any question.
Right.
Okay, back to custody. Can I get more custody if the other party is having the kids sleep with their parents all the time and going away to Florida to visit her boyfriend?
Okay. So the things that I would want to know in this situation is, what do you mean by all the time? Do you mean she went a week and for you, that's all the time? Or is she going to Florida to visit her boyfriend once a month and staying there for a long period of time? Is she going to Florida to visit her boyfriend while you have your parenting time? Because if that's the case, it doesn't matter. Now, when they're leaving them at the grandparents' house, there's kind of, a gray area here. Because they're their grandparents, and just because they're staying with their grandparents doesn't mean that mom isn't being a mom. It could be that, they're having a relationship with their grandparents, which your children have a right to do. And you also have to think about the fact that I think a lot of people start thinking about parenting time as that's my time. This is my time with my child. But if you change your view and your perception of how you look at that as this is your child's time with you, this is your child's time with the other parent, and in this situation, it could be that this is your child's time with their grandparent. So, but that being said, if it's a situation where you have a judge who has the bias, or I shouldn't say bias, that's the wrong word, but I'm blanking on the word I'm looking for, but the inclination to say that the parents should have the right to the child before anybody else, even grandparents, then maybe you have a stronger case. But it really comes down to how often is it happening, why is it happening, can you prove that it's happening, or is mom just posting some pictures on Facebook of a trip she took a year ago, and every so often she posts a picture, because, and we actually had a situation where I had posted something about a trip that I had gone on like over the summer, or no, it was Alice's birthday party, and I think I had posted a video about it, and Caitlin was like, did you just have a birthday party? Like, everybody's wearing shorts, and it was in the middle of the summer. The middle of the winter. And I was like, no, that was from before. So sometimes it's very easy to think that what you're seeing on social media is in fact real life, when it's not always. And I think that's important to weigh in when you're trying to decide whether or not you're going to go back to court. So I'd have a lot more questions in regard to that situation. And a lot of it, unfortunately, I'd have to say, well, it depends.
This next one is another one that you'd probably have quite a few more questions before being able to give, a real substantial answer. But if I'm being denied additional parenting time by the other party, what do I do?
All right, so here typically think that it's an every other weekend, or maybe even less than that, type of base parenting schedule. So, or it could be something where, and we see this so often in agreements that people have come to without attorneys, is they say, let's just call it dad, dad will have parenting time as the parties agree. I think, although I understand it because they're getting along and they're like, maybe the situation right now isn't great, but it will change and then things will be better. It is probably one of the worst agreements, the worst phrases you can put in your agreement, because if one person doesn't agree, so in this case, if mom says, no, yeah, you're not having any time, or you're not having more time, you got nothing, and you got nothing to go on except to go back to court. If it's a case where, the situation has changed, let's say at the time you entered into the first stipulation, where, and again, I'm just guessing, but let's say it's an every other weekend situation. So at the time you entered into that, maybe you lived further away. So let's say you lived 45 minutes away, and you couldn't do something where they were sleeping over and, coming, you had to drop them off at school just because of the distance. And now let's say you've moved closer. Now that should be a situation where if you can ask for additional time, mom should be able to grant it. Now I'd also have the question of what would mom be saying of a reason why you can't? Has there been abuse in the past? Has there been, inappropriate behavior? Has there been any type of conflict for that? Or is mom just protecting her time because she's afraid that if she gives you more, that she's going to lose child support, basically? So yes, you're right. I would have many, many, many questions to follow that up to see. But I think, one of the important things is if you are in a position to have more time, ask for it. Most agreements have something written in that, the parties can temporarily change the parenting time or grant the other parent more parenting time. There's usually language, if you've had even decent attorneys, because I think even those that I wouldn't consider great attorneys usually do somehow get that phrase in there. And, if you have that and you're keeping track of the time that you ask. Now, this doesn't mean that you should ask every single day and become like overbearing and controlling, but you should still be regularly asking. So if it was a situation where, let's say it's us with the kids and I have them every other weekend, but I want them. So if I say, hey, I'd love to be able to take them after school on Wednesday, would that be cool? And you write back to me and you say, nope. Well, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't still continue to ask, because if you don't continue to ask, it's basically you waiving your right to argue that you should have more time because you didn't continue to ask for it. Now, if I start asking you 3 times a day, every single day, I think that's going to make me look a little crazy. So you always have to use some common sense here. But make sure if you're asking and you're being constantly denied, I'd ask for the reason. Okay, so I understand you're saying that, I can't have them additional time, but can I ask why? And maybe you'll get a response that the additional time you keep asking for is happening during one of their activities. Or maybe you'll hear, some sort of reason that you can change your request. So a lot of it just has to do with common sense and, getting down to the nitty-gritty of why. If you're headed towards court, make sure you're documenting everything.
Okay. Are hidden cameras allowed in the home to spy on one spouse while the other one is away on vacation?
No, that's an easy no. If cameras are hidden in the state of Massachusetts, we are a 2-party consent state. Not only is it a no and it's going to make you look crazy, but it's a no because you can land yourself in jail. So do not do that. No hidden cameras. Now, I am a big believer in my house, we have, ring security systems all over the place, because of a number of reasons that I just won't get into. But, we want to make sure that our home is secure. But everybody knows that they're there. Everyone who comes into our home knows that they're there. They are not hidden. So let's say there's a situation where me and my husband are at home and things escalate. Well, in that particular situation, yes, I have the camera. If I go on vacation or he goes on vacation and one of us is home alone, yes, either one of us can check the security camera. But I cannot hide a camera in my house to see if my husband is, screwing around when I go away. No, no, no. Do not do that. So no. No. No.
Switching gears again. If you've taken money out of your retirement and borrowed money from a family member for the down payment of a home and paid off any credit cards and whatnot to raise your credit scores to buy this home, is she responsible for half of the debt?
The debt being like the marital home? Or my guess is this question is asking if it's been to pay off the credit cards, and as well as the retirement. Is that
what I got from this question is potentially a loan against the retirement. Well, this says taken money out, but borrowed money from a family member. So maybe the outstanding loans to the family member, the money borrowed.
Okay. So one of the first things I'd be looking for is there a promissory note? Because unfortunately, it's not uncommon that parents, the couple's married and they need to buy their first home, and the parents, are very generous at giving the money to help with the down payment. And oftentimes, there's no discussion of what happens with this money if the marriage doesn't work out. There's usually no discussion of whether or not the parents were getting that money back at the time the house is sold. So one of the first things I'd look for, and if somebody were to come to me saying, this is what we're thinking of doing, how do we protect ourselves? I'd say, get a promissory note. Make sure it lays out the terms that you can clearly see that this is an expectation for it to come back. If you don't have that, you have a little bit of an uphill battle here, because you would have to have some sort of testimony. You may have to have, your parents file a complaint in equity within the case, trying to assert their claim to the money that they're claiming that is owed to them. So there's a lot of complexity there. It also highly depends on the length of the marriage. If this was something, and again, let's say we're married, and this is a situation. We get married, we're newlyweds, I say, hey mom, we're broke, we need money to buy a house, can you give us the $100,000 for the down payment? My mom says, yeah, sure, I can do that. If then we get divorced 6 months later, I have a much stronger argument to get that $100,000 back than if we were married for 15 years. The longer the marriage goes on, the more intertwined into the marriage any money that's commingled is looked at, and the less chance that you're getting it back. Now, do you still have an argument for it? And we see this a lot of times when somebody uses premarital funds. If they're walking into the marriage and they have a significant amount and they're putting that towards the home, there could be an argument that they should get that amount back before anything else is split. But again, it all depends.
So that question or that answer actually, is relative to one of the next questions. So I'll skip around for a minute here. So we're talking about a 15-year marriage in this situation.
Is this a long one? Should I take
one
this
party?
15 years?
It's a little long. If money is saved before the marriage, so premarital funds, but then commingled into a joint account after getting married, in that money, along with money saved during the marriage and put into that same joint account over the next few years, is that considered marital or separate property? And taking it a step further, all of the money that went into this account was then used for the down payment on a house.
Okay.
After 15 years of marriage, should the person that had the premarital money saved get some or all of their saved money back?
So this is a situation, I think you're right. It does play off completely of the last question that we just went over. A 15-year marriage is, it's not what we consider to be long-term would be like 20 plus years, but 15 years is getting there. This is more than just a mid-length marriage, which is, typically 7 to 10. It's getting towards a long-term marriage. With that fact pattern, I would say that person has not a very strong case at all to get that back, and it's going to be split. Now, what I would recommend for anyone in that situation moving forward, prenups. Get a prenup. If you have money before that you're going to be utilizing, prenup it, because then even if it goes in, it's still maintaining its separate character. So no, in that situation, no. And it might be something where maybe you start there and see if the other side agrees. But if the other side doesn't agree, that is not something I would hang my hat on and run up fees in order to fight over. Unfortunately, you didn't do it right. You did it the way that you would typically when people are married. They don't think about that. But unfortunately, you have to think about that. You can't make up the argument later if you didn't think about it at the time.
Yep. And one additional thing to add, where you had said prenup, if you're already married and it's becoming an issue, a postnup. You have the option to do a postnup as well, which could do the same thing.
Yep.
This is a question I get, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot as well. What is she entitled to if she's never contributed to any household bills, down payment, maintenance on said home, or anything?
So yeah, this often comes up. This is another one where I'd have to look for a lot of information. One being, do they have kids? If they have kids and she's been a stay-at-home mom, whether there was an agreement for that or whether there was an agreement by waiver, basically, that you just let it continue to happen. If she's contributing to the home and to the child, the court looks at that as just as important as if somebody is working and bringing in an income. Now, if it's a case where there are no children, and this is just, a woman who likes to sit up on the couch and put her feet up and eat bonbons and drink wine and watch TV all day, well, maybe you have an argument. So a lot of this is really fact dependent, but even with that, then we have to look at the length of the marriage. Did you let this woman, sit on your couch and eat bonbons for 20 years? Or did you get rid of her after a year when you saw she wasn't doing anything? Those are the things that really make a difference in what the outcome is going to be. So I can't really say just from that. I think eliminate children and just go with it's a shorter term marriage. I think you have a stronger argument that, maybe it's not that she's going to walk away with nothing, but maybe you get a greater share because you were a greater contributor. Those are the things where you have to weigh the cost benefit of, how much are you going to pay out for what you're potentially getting.
Should the person who pays child support get additional life insurance to cover child support just in case something happens?
Yeah, probably. Some of that it depends on what's in your agreement. And for the most part, that is built in. If you're paying, again, unless you've had a crappy attorney or you did it yourself and you just didn't know, it's usually built into an agreement when child support is at issue. So usually, let's just call it $100 a week. Somebody's ordered to pay. You figure out for the length of time that the child, has to become emancipated, throwing in some extracurricular activities, throwing in, college-related issues, because in Massachusetts, parents do have to contribute towards their children's college. So if you look at all that, you can usually come up with a number as a security in case you were to die, so your children still have the same support. Now, that being said, even if you're not the person paying support, if I'm representing the person who's not paying support, obviously, I want them to have less costs. But for the good of your children, if you were to die, yes, the person who's paying the support, they don't have to pay that any longer. But you still want to be able to support your children even after you're gone. And that's the point. It's not to provide for the other person. It's not, that you die and all of a sudden your ex, who a lot of times you don't like anymore, is off taking vacations and, living this grand life because they just came into a windfall. This is for the protection of your children. And that's really, it can become a very emotional issue. We also get a lot of times when people start talking about life insurance, they immediately think that their spouse is going to kill them. They're going to kill them so that they can take the money. Does it happen? Yes. There are situations where that unfortunately does happen. But for the most part, that is not the point of somebody asking for life insurance. It's to make sure that the children are protected. So I forget what the point was, but I think it was a yes that I made more complicated.
This next one will be our last question because the additional question that we have is related to New Hampshire and very specific fact pattern. We don't practice in New Hampshire, so we can't really answer that. But the last one we have today is, can I get alimony in addition to child support in Massachusetts? And how is this decided in a no-fault 1A divorce?
Okay, so let's start with the end of that, because a 1A divorce, when we're talking fault versus no fault, what we call an irretrievable breakdown or irreconcilable differences, that's basically saying that nobody's necessarily at fault, we just don't want to be married anymore. That can be either with a 1A or a 1B, which is your contested divorce. So that's not what makes it a 1A. Because technically, I guess you could agree to fault even in a 1A, because you're just agreeing. Sorry, ask me the last part of the question one more time.
It's asking how alimony and child support is decided, or if you can get both of those, and how, if so, how that's decided in a 1A.
Okay. So again, a 1A is the two of you deciding on your own. You don't have court intervention. So that's where it comes down to when you start. Within a 1A, you don't have a right to get temporary orders. You can't go into court. You're not getting judicial feedback, and the judge is not deciding your case unless you all your agreements, come before the judge, and the judge says this isn't fair and I'm not accepting this. That's a little bit of a different story for another day. But if you agree to it, you can do pretty much anything you want within an agreed upon divorce. So yeah, you can get alimony, you can get child support if it's agreed upon. Now my guess is this question is more looking for, how do I argue that while we're trying to negotiate a 1A? And if you're doing it on your own, you may not understand the law, but there is a newly released case, Kavanaugh. It's probably not completely new any longer, but Kavanaugh v. Kavanaugh, which came out in Massachusetts, which really laid out the process of obtaining both alimony and child support, and it's actually mandatory now that anytime we're dealing with a child support or a divorce, we're looking both at child support and alimony in almost every single calculation, which has made our job much harder and lots of paperwork. So yeah, you can get it. I'd recommend trying to read that, but think of it as alimony is for the spouse, child support is for the children. You could have a situation where one person is getting alimony but paying child support, and that 100% we've seen that play out a number of times. So, and you said that was the last question?
That is the last question relating to Massachusetts.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Caitlin, for coming on. Thank you for everyone who submitted questions. We appreciate that, because then you're getting the information that you want. And, thank you for coming on the webinar. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something that you can take away and move forward in either making your divorce better, easier, or, if all else fails, just call us. So everybody have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.